Hey everybody, I recorded the how to port this 1974 MX175a cylinder yesterday, and the lighting was so bad that the video is virtually unusable. So I'm doing a try to make a quick video here of what I did and why I did what I did. It is April 17th, and here in the Colorado Rockies we got over a foot of snow yesterday, and it's blowing today, but this is a perfect day to work on some of this stuff here. I'm restoring, getting sort of race prepping this 1974 MX175 here, and one of the things that I was doing was cleaning up the ports on this cylinder. So unfortunately, all of my before video yesterday, which would show you what these ports look like, didn't come out. So what I will do is try to splice in some of those so that you can see kind of a before and after. But the first thing that I did was these are very blocky. They're not even tapered at all. They were just literally the width of the outer edge here across these ports, which acts as a huge air dam and really restricts gas flow from the bottom end up to the top end. So I tapered all of these in and cleaned up the inside of the ports. They were very rough. So those are looking like I want them to. That'll help with gas flow hugely, and also really cleaned up the exhaust. As you can see there, it's much, well, you don't know what it looked like before, but it's good, clean, no big casting marks or anything, polished. That's the exhaust. The intake for the big reed valve here is much cleaner. Everything's shiny, and it'll flow a lot more gas. I didn't do a whole lot of actual port changing, changing the dimensions or the location. What I did find was, if you are going to work on your motors, it's not a bad idea to start out with something, you know, one of these manuals here, the Climber, the ones that say competition secrets or whatever they want to call it at the top here, high performance how-tos, will have all sorts of, at the very back, have all sorts of modifications you can make to the bike and all the specs. On this particular one, it lists the stock sport port specs here, and what I found was, when going through and checking those, that the exhaust port, everything else was relatively right on, but the exhaust port was lower by almost 2 millimeters than the factory specs here, which is 1.02 inches, 26 millimeters. So to check that, just get your caliper here, and everything's measured from the top. So you open it up to, I'm at 25.99, close enough for demonstration. So at the specs that are factory specs, you could tell that the upper port was much lower than what it needed to be. So all I did was take it back to factory specs, which that alone will help the flow greatly over what it had. It was you know, restricting it more than even what the factory wanted it to go out as, and that's not uncommon. These are usually close but not dead on. So always check, if you can locate original specs here, always check them. against what you've got before you even start. So before I even pull a cylinder off of a bike, one of the first things that I do is, this is the piston that was in it, so I obviously intake side, arrow forward. On the piston itself, there are the piston ring locating dowels. Those are where the ends of your pistons are gonna, or ends of your piston rings are gonna mate up. So I put corresponding marks on the top here as to where they are located. So if you slide this down into, and you kind of get everything centered here, you can see that as the intake port comes in, the boost port there, there's all sorts of room. Hopefully you can see this. The light keeps coming and going here with the storm, but and then as we get down to where the intake port opens up, you actually have very little gap on either side there. Let me grab this and bring it over in the light. So there's very little room for you to widen the intake port at all, or you'll end up with a ring end gap where you don't want it, which is over an opening like that. It'd immediately snag and break your ring. So I know from that, before I even start, that I can't widen that significantly. I also, one of the first things I look for is where does the exhaust port hit as far as top of this piston there. You want it flush with the top of the piston. There's no benefit in going any lower than that, because that's where gases are going to rush off of here. And it actually, if you do go lower, you run the risk of snagging a ring there as well. So don't do that. Don't go any further. I did notice that this was a hair above the top of the piston, so I took a scribe and I marked the cylinder wall there just with a little file, just right along the edge there. So scribe your cylinder, and when you do the cleanup, take that exhaust port right down to flush with the piston. That ensures that you're not going to do anything that is going to cause problems for you. Another thing to watch for is if you're going to lower your intake any, be real careful that you don't go beyond this. I don't know if you can see there, but the bottom of this port is barely above the lower mating surface of this cylinder. So if you went in and lowered this port much, you run the risk of breaking through here, which will ruin your cylinder. So be mindful of how much room you've got there, which generally is very little. What's nice about these manuals that have the performance stuff in them, they also will tell you how to modify the intake port, what they suggest, degreeing the ports, how to do that, modifying exhaust port, modifying transfer and boost ports. When we're talking cylinders, this is the exhaust, obviously. Transfer ports are here on the side. Those are the smaller ones. Boost port is what they call this enlarged, what Yamaha calls this enlarged part above the intake. It's not its own port, but it does transfer gases up higher than just the intake itself, which you see there. So go through, I didn't do anything crazy on it, just took this cylinder back to factory specs and made everything very smooth, and that alone will help you hugely in just having a good, clean running motor that performs the way the factory wanted it to. I'm also going to install a set. These are the factory reeds that come with it. They're the steel reeds and very much old technology. So what I like to do with these is replace those with the power reeds here. Boyson has always said the best power increase for your money here by replacing these reeds. I don't know about that, but you can tell a difference, especially if your old reeds aren't up to new specs. So these do help with the power. They're not hugely expensive. Actually, they're pretty inexpensive, and it's a nice upgrade. I'm going to go on this bike. I'm sticking with the stock 28mm carburetor, which will use the stock boot here. So not getting crazy with it, but just want it to run at the best that it can for what it is. I'll do a very, very light hone on the cylinder. It's within specs. Actually really nice. It's got no wear mark at the top here or anything. So should be good. If you have any questions, post them. Other than that, I think we're good on this particular one. I'm going to keep building on this bike here over the next week or two, and I'll put up some other videos as I put the rest of the motor together and all, and get this bike back in shape and ready to go. So thanks for looking.